Okay, if you missed the Valhalla video, then that's okay. You can use this file. But I was pleased with that using that tool, and I'm going to use those polygons because I think they're a little nicer than the ones that we made using the Q surface area and then to the convex hull. It's you know it's all okay. We this is the point of the class, is for us to experiment and to kind of critique the pitfalls and the benefits of different types of tools and styles of analysis and that kind of thing. So I'm going to get rid of that old one because I'm not using it anymore. And so now what's the goal? I kind of want to show these as an overlapping heat map where someone could look at the map and actually point to any area in the town and tell me how many of these overlapping isochrones there are. So you might say, well, why do I even need to do any more tools? Like I could just go to the properties here. I could make this semi-transparent, something like that. I hit apply. And then you can kind of start to see, yeah, it's a little noisy with those boundaries. I shut the boundaries off here. Shut those boundaries off, and we'll say, okay, that looks a little cleaner. And with some basic symbology, I can kind of start to create an argument that there's a good diversity of open space areas down in this area. There's kind of opacity over here. But it'd be nice to be able to categorize them individually. And I'm not going to be able to do that with the current shapefile, right? So if I had all of these as separate shapefiles, I might be able to combine them using not an intersect, but a union. I could put them all into a tool that would take those separate files and kind of combine them together. And if you need to review some vector overlay, there's a few videos that I can point you to. But it's awkward. It's like, what do we do? We've got this one file with all these overlapping things, and it's kind of like we want it to intersect itself, and that's convenient because there's a tool that we can use in the SAGA tool set called SelfIntersect. And it's kind of a little bit of a misnomer because normally with an intersect you're taking two, if there's two overlapping extents, then it's kind of the and statement. It's only where they overlap. But this self-intersect it kind of acts more like a union. It takes every single one of these input objects and then kind of splits them all into pieces based on where they all kind of partake. But we're not going to lose any of these singletons out here. They're just going to be part of the product file, but they'll just be their own record. So because I want to have some kind of categorization, I'm going to open up the attribute table here. And we've got this contour, which could work, but I kind of like ones and zeros for just kind of true and false. And it's when we do the self-intersect, it's going to create a new attribute that will concatenate some kind of redundant unique ID. So, if we have two that overlap, let's say it was Woodstock Playground and Hodgkins Curtain Park, if there was an overlapping section, that overlapping section would have Woodstock Playground with a pipeline and concatenated with whatever it touches. So instead of having a bunch of names that are concatenated or this random number 5, I'm just going to do a 1 because ones, make me feel good or something. So oopsie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my field calculator. I'm going to just call this overlap. And it's an integer, that's fine. The integer will be 1. And I'm going to say OK. So now every single isochrone has a 1. And I'm going to hit save. And let's go find self-intersect and see what we get. Polygon self-intersection. So I'm going to double click that guy. I've got that identifier. We want our overlap to be the identifier. And let's save this file because I'm pretty sure it's going to work. And I'm going to call this isochrone 5-minute walk Valhalla. And we'll just call this diversity score. It's a long name, but it's kind of fitting. I mean, I try to not have such long names, but I like that. I like to, whenever I make a new tool on a file, to kind of just have the name reflect the process that the file has been through to help remind me how I made it. So let's just see what happens. I can hit run, and these SAGA tools, they're kind of old school, but they're pretty sturdy. They seem to kind of always, well, at least my experience has been, they always work pretty well. But yeah, so now what are we looking at, right? So now we're looking at this kind of very split up file, which if we look at it this way, it might seem kind of senseless. But if we get our kind of identify tool and start clicking around, we're going to see, okay, overlap 1, aha, ID overlap 1, 1. So this is a place where there are two separate isochrones interacting. And there's 1, 1, 1, 1. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. So this is kind of a category of 5, 4, 2, 3, 3, 1. And so if we were ambitious, what we could do, if we cared enough, we could go into our attribute table, and using this ID, we could create a categorization from it. It appears that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 is the category. There's 3 areas that have, according to our analysis, have 7 open spaces within a 5-minute walk. So it's only 7 classes, and I think I can kind of keep track of it. So I'm not going to go and try to categorize this, but there's a lot of ways you could do that. You could do it by the length of the string divided by a certain number or minus a thing. You could automate this so that it would become 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. But I think it's just as easy to keep it in our minds that 7 is the most, there's going to be 1 for each category, and 1 is the least. So I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do before I go to export is I'm going to go to my properties here, and I'm going to categorize it just to see what it looks like. So let's go to categorized, and we're going to categorize it by ID, I think it is. Yeah, ID. And classify, and there are our 7 categories, which is great. I don't like that color scheme though. See, we go like that, and it's a nominal color scheme, and it just looks like a, it looks a little cray-cray. It looks like a little psychedelic. So I think what we're going to do is, there's a couple of different color ramps you could use. Something linear. You might cross 1 color, or 2, but I wouldn't make it too many colors. But I kind of like this viridis. I don't really know why it's called that, but I've always liked that color scheme. So I'm going to hit apply. It has that kind of heat map feel, and that's kind of the style of what I'm thinking. I mean, that kind of, without the lines, if we got rid of those lines, which we can change by going to the symbol here, simple fill, no pen. Okay, apply. This starts to feel more convincing to me that we could turn this into a pretty map in Illustrator, because we're starting to see those patterns, right? Where it looks like, okay, yep, a good diversity in this region, less so, very much less so. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's, for the purposes of this tutorial, acceptable. And I think the next thing we got to do is just prepare all of our exports for Illustrator. And so for the rest of this video, I'm going to go over how we get ready to get into Illustrator. And then the next video will all be what we do once we're in Illustrator, and how we kind of build a good Illustrator file efficiently and quickly. Cool, so let's get going. In Illustrator, so long as we have the same export extent, meaning whatever our page is going to be, so long as that's the same for every single export, then we can just copy and paste in place, and we can build the Illustrator file, and everything will be registered, so we don't have to try to line up our layers. Now we just have to decide what else we want to export. So I know we probably are going to want a file that represents Cambridge and Somerville, the towns, that is. We're probably going to want to see building footprints. We're probably going to want to see the right-of-way for the roads. And I'm going to do a couple of SVG exports. SVG is scalable vector graphic. Those are the vector files that we can kick out of Q and bring into Illustrator. And so all of our exports are going to be SVGs, and we'll probably do, I think, one JPEG. And the JPEG will be this aerial here. So for my first export, let's just say we're going to do the infrastructure here, which is the right-of-way, the building footprints, and we're going to do the open space subset and the open space source, let's say, and those locations. And that's a lot. I think that'll be a pretty good export. I hope it manages them all okay. So what I really want to do is I want to see what I have to make my layout now, right? So I'm going to go up here and go to new print layout. And for this first one, we're just going to do what's called ANSI A, which is letter, 8.5 by 11. So I usually, with my layouts, I write what the publishing dimension is, ANSI A, and it's going to be landscape. I'll do this one landscape, because the extent that our map is going to take is landscape. So I say OK. And so this layout manager comes up, and there's a whole bunch of bells and whistles and things we can do. But all we're using it for is to just export our data so we can do all the design in a different program in Illustrator. So the page is not the right size right now, I'm sure, because this is mostly European program and they use the A system. So I'm going to right click it or control click if you're in a Mac, and then go to page properties. And then size, yeah, it wants it to be an A4, but I want it to be ANSI A. So this is letter, and you can also just hit letter, but go ANSI A like that. And of course it's in millimeters because of the Europe thing. So if you want it to be in inches, just for your own sanity, it doesn't really matter because we know that's the right size. But if you didn't trust it for some reason, you can go down to custom, and then it lets you switch the unit here. And so, oh, okay, great. I'm right. ANSI A is letter. So that's all happy, and that's good. Now all I have to do is I got to add my map, kind of the map canvas, or this is the same in Arc as a data frame. So I'm going to add a data frame with this tool right here. It's kind of a weird icon. It just looks like a piece of paper. And then these guides help me get lined up, and I'm going to just do it for the exact dimensions of the page that I want to export. And of course it doesn't come through perfectly, but I can line it up using this move content or item content tool. And what that's going to do is help me center the map. And if I want, I can use my mouse wheel or a trackpad to zoom in and out, but it's really coarse. No, that's not too bad. But it usually it'll double the scale. And so the better way to do it, and I think at least in planning the more responsible way to do it, is to try to decide exactly what you want your scale to be based on your publishing extent. Now, a lot of planners like to physically draw on their maps, and this, during COVID, we're going to be presenting online digitally, so it won't matter as much, but just out of habit, I try to have my scales in the US divisible by 12, so that I know, okay, an inch is exactly equal to a certain number of feet. So 1 to 36,000, for instance, is, that would be, I shouldn't need a calculator for this. 1 inch is 3,000 feet, right? So 1 inch is 36,000 inches. So that means 1 inch is 3,000 feet. And that's okay. I mean, that's not too bad. I know that a half inch then is 1,500 feet, and a quarter inch is 750 feet. It's nice if you can get a base unit that's around 500 feet, which will be a little harder with this, but that's okay. Don't usually do a third of an inch, but anyway, that's not too bad. Another useful scale to know is 63,360, and that is 1 inch equals a mile. And so, we could try for a 1 inch equals 31,680, which that means that scale would be 1 inch equals 1/2 of a mile. But I think that's not going to fit on our page, and almost certainly no one's going to take a ruler and measure on this, but it's also helpful in Illustrator because Illustrator's base units for its kind of Cartesian coordinate system are going to be inches or, you know, points or centimeters or something. So making sure you know what your scale is on this export, I think is just good practice. But let's stick with 36,000. I think that's fine. And once I feel pretty good about my setup, I think that's pretty fair. It looks like I've got the whole extent in pretty well. Then I'm going to lock it in and just say, yep, I decided, that's it. So now no matter what I do, it's not going to move. If I have my move item content and I accidentally click and drag, it's not going to do anything. You do have to be careful when this tool's on, because a lot of times you'll accidentally try to move the, you know, pan around and you'll mess it up. So now that that's good, all you got to do is you go up to export as SVG. And if you have a computer with not a ton of RAM, then you won't want to do this many layers at once. You may have to do them, hopefully not one at a time, but at least in sets. But I know that my computer can handle it, so I'm going to export all of this as an SVG, and we'll tease it apart once we bring it into Illustrator. So I'm going to go up here, export as SVG. And it's telling us, oh, there's some problems and you shouldn't trust it too much. And I will say I have had a few issues with really, really big files, but we're talking, you know, 36-inch by 48-inch artboards and lots of contours or something. But in general, I find SVG to be a way better export than a PDF. There's a bunch of different random reasons, but I like the SVG export. You're welcome to experiment with whatever you like. So I'm going to put this under linked files here in my Tutorial A desktop, and I'm going to call this infrastructure. And so that's just an SVG. And these options do matter. I don't try to do them as groups. We're going to tease it apart using color. The group function, I think, is part of what messes it up sometimes. Always export as vectors. We do want that. I get rid of this stuff, and I never want it to simplify the geometry. I want to be in charge of the simplification when and if it happens in Illustrator. So I don't do that. And then we're not exporting text right now, but I always like to export text as a text object so that I can then edit it in Illustrator or, you know, rename it or do whatever I want. If you export it as a path, it's just going to be a vector object that you can't change the font or anything like that. So export text as text object. And now that I've done that, every time I export an SVG, this should be the automatic setting if I save my file. So do that. And yeah, it was a pretty massive export. So you may want to just do not quite as much as I did there. So now that I've exported those guys, I would probably just decide to do this one all alone because it's a bunch of colors and it's a funky object and I want to make sure I can see it. So go back here, I'm going to hit refresh, and this one's going to be alone. I'm fine with that. So don't show me this message again, please. And I'm going to call this isochrones. Isochrones, that's good. Hit save. And let's see, I'll do one more vector. What else did I need? I could probably do these road center lines, but I'd want to categorize them first. So I'm going to categorize them by functional class. And if I categorize them by class, classify, let's just see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I just want to have a couple of options. I mean, even two classes would be fine, just to have the option to have a big street and a little street. There's a whole bunch of, I think there's probably, yeah, road type is another one. So usually with these, there's always different, and actually I kind of like that better. You have to kind of just play around with what kind of classification you want to do for the style of your map. There's also, yeah, federal class. I think this is based on arterials and things like that. But anyway, if you classify it by color, then the color helps us tease it apart later. So I'm going to just go with, I think this is a federal functional class. So I'm going to say OK. And then now I'm going to go back to my layout, hit refresh, and now I'm going to export as SVG. And I'm going to call this roads. I know I said not to do that earlier, but that's what I'm going to do. Save. And let's do one more. I think we can bring in labels if we need to later, but I'm just not going to worry about automating labels. That could be a mess. So the last thing I want to do is bring in an aerial, and I'll use this nice high-res one here. And so now that that's there, I'm going to hit refreshed automatically. And this one I don't do as an SVG because it's an image. And I'm going to do this as export as an image. And it's also going to go to the linked files, and I'll just call this NAIP, because that's what it is. On small page sizes like ANSI A or ANSI B, 300 dpi is fine. If you're going to do a really, really big area, then you'll want maybe, you might want to bump that down just because your computer would be upset with you. But that should be fine. That would take 2 seconds. Okay, let's go into Illustrator and see what havoc we can wreak with all these points and lines and polygons and pixels. So, all right, thanks for sticking with it.